this panel is focused on mobile security, obviously, since it's in the mobile sec track. I just want to take a quick second to introduce you to me, but absolutely I'm not going to be the one that's talking here. It's these guys. I've assembled a hell of a crew here for you guys to heckle, to pick on, to ask questions of, to really get them stumped if you can. So I want to make this interactive. Throw the questions out. Let's keep this thing light and enjoyable. So real quickly about myself, I'm a security researcher for Veracode, formerly a penetration tester with Symantec and at Stake. I presented at a number of conferences, and about 2.5 years ago, I started doing a lot of research in the mobile application tier and the mobile application space. So putting that out there right now that I've got a biased lens, I'll try to evenly moderate this panel as best I can, but if you guys see that I'm leaning towards the application layer a little bit heavy, go ahead and call shenanigans on me and I'll try to change things around. I want to take 2 seconds before I introduce our awesome panel here and talk about the concept of the panel overall. So essentially I had this concept of the mobile security stack, which is very similar to the PC or enterprise computing security stack with a little bit of a twist. And I broke the mobile threat landscape kind of into 4 tiers. At the top layer, we have the application security, which would be your actual apps that you're running on the phone, the code that calls, the APIs provided by the operating system. And your flaws at this layer are going to be like your coding flaws, your Trojan spyware type applications that make it into the marketplace, those types of attacks. Below that, we have the operating system, which is very equivalent to the operating system in the PC world. It sits as an intermediary between the hardware and the application and passes data back and forth. In the mobile space, we also have the concept of the hardware or firmware on the individual devices that you guys are holding. And we'll get into some more of that layer. And then the infrastructure security, which is a little different in the mobile space, as in it's the cell towers and the underlying components that support the actual phones themselves. So I don't think we need to dive too deeply into some of this stuff. I think you guys get the general gist of what this, how this security layer breaks out. And what I'd like to do first is introduce you to the panelists. So what I did was I got 2 panelists for each of those layers that we just discussed, except for one layer where Ralph is by himself, so he has to defend his layer by himself. The goal is to get these guys talking about the security research that they've done at each of those individual layers and what the results of that security is and how much it actually is effective in the mobile space. So that being said, I'd like to introduce Nick DiPetrillo and Don Bailey, who will be representing the infrastructure layer at the bottom of our graph there.
Excuse me, we're suitor number 1 and suitor number 2.
There you go. And just the glasses alone, scream, hello, we're Don and Nick. So go ahead and introduce yourselves, guys. Give a little background.
Hi. I like to introduce myself by saying I'm not Zane Lackey, but actually Zane's right there. He's a great guy. So actually I work for ISEC Partners. We do mobile application security, we do mobile security, we do web application security. We pretty much run the whole gambit. If you've seen any work that I've been doing lately, thank you for not telling me that it sucks. But I've kind of been doing a lot of research on mobile tracking and looking at different devices sitting on the M2M networks to try to identify whether or not they can be remotely compromised in many different ways. So actually this fits very well with what we're going to be talking about and debating today.
And I'm Nick DiPetrillo. I'm a security researcher with Crucial Security Harris Corporation. Last year, talked with Don about on the Carmen San Diego project, doing GSM, geolocation, and a few other things. And that's it. And I'm not as smart as the next guy.
So at the next layer, we actually have, and he's so smart, he got a layer to himself. He doesn't get a teammate. Ralph Philippe Weinman. Oh, hit the button.
Push to print. Okay, so I'm from the University of Luxembourg. So my usual area of research actually is not mobile security, but cryptanalysis. But I spent most of last year looking at baseband firmwares and reverse engineering them, finding bugs there, and trying to exploit them, in some cases successfully, in some cases not so successfully. I actually have a long-standing interest in that kind of research, but I kind of stopped doing that for 12 years. So that's when I last looked into these things. But yeah, let's not talk about the past.
All right, as we move up the stack to the next layer, to the operating system layer, we've got Charlie Miller and Dino Daizovi representing the OS.
Represent. So Charlie Miller, I've written exploits for the Android browser, the iOS browser, found remotely exploitable bugs in the SMS stack of the iPhone, so that's about it.
I'm Dino Daizovi. As I presented in my talk yesterday, I spent a bit of time reverse engineering various components of the iOS security features and security protections, and have been doing kind of the same for Mac OS X, for which iOS is based on, for many years before that.
Awesome. And then we get up into the top tier of our previous graphic there, the application layer, and we have Chris Weisopel and Anthony Lineberry.
Anthony Lineberry. I work with Lookout Mobile Security, doing security research with them, nefarious application analysis, and I've done research in the past on platform vulnerabilities with Android.
Hi, I'm Chris Weisopel. I work with Tyler. I'm CTO of Veracode, and I'm focused on using static analysis to look at coding errors in mobile applications.
All right. So as you can see, we got some of the best at each of these tiers to represent the research they've done and try to determine which of these layers is the most secure. So the basic concept of the panel, again, is kind of a mixed martial arts, knockdown, drag-out, brawl, where the rules of engagement are essentially there are none. They can ask each other questions. You guys can ask questions. I'm going to be monitoring a Twitter fall so that you guys can ask questions by tweeting to BH Mobile hashtag, and hopefully we'll be able to get some of those involved. I solicited some questions leading up to the event, both via webinar and via Twitter. And basically, the end result is to let these guys kind of go at it and determine where you guys need to spend your money in securing the mobile arena. Which one of these layers is the most important to secure first, and which is going to be the most effective. So that being said, are the combatants ready to rumble?
Let's do it. We're ready.
Awesome. All right, so I have a couple specific questions, and these questions are actually for all of the panelists, but I'll probably just start at the bottom, and we'll work our way up. You guys can start with the first question. Bottom of the stack, not skill set, Don. Come on.
I love you too, Tyler.
No, Nick, go to the end. I'm just kidding, just kidding. So question number one, we're going to have, question number one, targeted attack or target of opportunity? What are the chances of mass compromise using your layer, and how many targets might I be able to get by using your layer as an attack vector? And what we'll do is we'll start with the guys on the end, but all of the panelists will respond to this question, and you guys try to keep in mind what the goal is here is to determine which one of these layers is the most dangerous in the mobile space. So that being said, Don, Nick, what are the chances of mass compromise? Could mass compromise happen at your layer?
Actually, the reason why I brought up Zane at the beginning wasn't just to harass him, but also because I wanted to touch on his research. So my M2M research started out with a thing called war texting, which you may or may not have seen yesterday. It essentially is a methodology for determining whether or not things can be attacked via SMS. And that's, people kind of think of that as an application attack, right? And Zane and Luis Murat did an exceptional amount of work in this space, which is why I brought his name up. So I actually got the idea from those guys, right? And kind of wanted to build on that idea. So I kind of took their work and ported it to M2M and said, how much can I own using SMS? And then I realized that it's actually not an SMS problem or an application problem, it's an infrastructure problem. So you can send one type of SMS that's been pre-designed for a certain type of device, and then all these different vendors own that type of device, but then use it in different ways for SCADA systems or car security systems or whatever. And you can own all of them in one foul swoop because the infrastructure doesn't protect against any of that, right? So I think we win.
Also, a good point to make is with infrastructure attacks, Obviously, any device that's sitting on infrastructure could be potentially vulnerable to these attacks. Or, just owning the infrastructure, it's almost the equivalent of owning, a source repo or something like that. But also, given the infrastructure of cellular equipment, it doesn't change very often. These standards aren't really changing. So there is a potential very large return on investment, and it's very difficult to fix these problems that are inherent in the infrastructure. You can't just go around upgrading, lots of equipment and lots of towers very quickly. So there's a lot of longevity with some of these attacks that are at the infrastructure layer, and that's kind of a big advantage, especially if it can be kept quiet.
Anybody else want to take a shot at that? Anybody else think that their layer, you can get a more faster, larger mass pwnage from your layer than the infrastructure guys?
Well, I think John touched on it with SMS. That's really one of the only ways. We skipped over you guys.
You can take it anywhere.
We're hopping right over to the firmware with the apps. But, SMS is one of the only things that, apps can be sitting there listening on and sort of have to handle them if they're listening to SMS messages. And obviously, apps can send SMS messages if they have that. So, I mean, that's the most viable propagation vector that I can see. I don't know, maybe you disagree?
Well, if you write an extremely popular application, there's obviously a widespread access to applications now compared to back in like the Windows Mobile days where you just kind of had to download it from a website yourself. Now if you write something that's relatively popular and you get a large install base on that and possibly package an exploit in that, you could have a relatively mass ownage there.
Well, wrong.
Oh,
Well, I think I'll take the first stab at the OS layer. Actually, if you want to look at what is the most possible way to do mass ownage, you actually look at what's already been done. And if you look at the compromises on the compromised applications on the Android marketplace, I believe that falls at the OS layer because it wasn't a vulnerability in the application; it's more a weakness in in the app distribution model. And in the facility, like basically the facilities of the OS that allowed these vulnerabilities to occur, that allowed these applications to take over full access to your device. So far in the mobile space, I think that's probably the most mass scale.
But you don't have to totally compromise the device to have mass ownage, right? They could just be sending lots of traffic and be DDoS bots. You don't have to necessarily own the whole device to do that kind of mass attack, right?
Let's also not forget that when you own the infrastructure at the very top, you can roll down attacks from owning the infrastructure down to any of these layers below infrastructure. That is a potential. So I think so when you're down at the very bottom of application, well, that's where you have to stay. It's very hard to go up. And
I just want to point out that he's saying we still win. That's all.
Yeah, so here's why you don't win. So for the apps, there's even your very popular apps are on like 10% of phones. So who cares? You own 10% of phones.
Wait. Who has Angry Birds on their phone right now?
Yeah, does Angry Birds accept SMS
Come on, put them up. You know you all do.
So
Don't lie.
It's more than 10%.
You're on my team, man. What are you doing?
and where did that app have to come from? Upstream.
Yeah, so anyway, the apps aren't distributed enough to be mass ownage. The baseband, you gotta like walk in the guy's living room. For the infrastructure, like there's so many different carriers, so much different equipment, you're not gonna mass own everything. It's the OS level. There's like, 3 or 4 OSs. You just find a bug in the way they parse SMSs.
Wrong.
Every phone. I wish I would have never said wrong when someone else was talking.
Yeah, I know. And the reason why is because with firmware over the air, I can now push a new operating system to everybody. So,
can you push an operating system to my phone right now?
Well, I could if I own the infrastructure, but because I'm not a BlackHat, I totally can't.
Well, I would like to ask, as a malicious application, as a malicious application, I mean, what do you care about getting? You care about exfiltrating data from the phone, contacts, SMSs, that kind of stuff. Do you really need to own the phone at the OS layer to do that, or can you just request permissions to grab all that stuff and secretly send it out? Or, I mean, possibly even just using other things like the fact that applications are logging all of that stuff to the system logs and pulling it from there.
I think that's a weakness in the OS if it lets the apps do that.
So wait. I'm gonna.
So apps shouldn't be able to access contacts.
Apps should not be allowed to access any data whatsoever.
I'm gonna take a second here. So it's a weakness in the OS, or was that an ingest?
No, I do think that where I differentiate the kind of the OS to application layer
Yeah.
is in where the application, in what the OS lets the application do. So if the OS is too permissive to applications, I believe that that is a weakness in the OS.
And here I'm going to put on I'm an app guy hat and help the app guys for a moment. So it's where you're drawing that gray line, but what if the application needs GPS, or what if the application needs contacts and you piggyback with a third-party library, like an ad library, that's pulling GPS coordinates and stealing that GPS information, or pulling your contacts and sending that outbound. That data exfiltration, now granted, it's sending it to an ad library, but I'm using that as an example. So
If I may hijack the conversation at this point, I don't mean to speak for Dino, but I think that you're saying
You're free to
gray
speak for me.
line, right?
it is a gray line.
There
there's
is no gray
doubt.
line. It's not a gray line. We work in bits, dude. It's 0 or 1, right? So when it comes down to it, there is an API, and the API is either facilitated by the operating system or it's facilitated by the app, right? And I think what Dino's saying is that if the operating system allows those changes to occur, it's an operating system problem. That seems pretty black and white.
If
right?
you're, yeah, if
So
you're,
how
if
does the
you're-
operating system stop it? How could it stop it?
There's this awesome thing called, well, for a variety of things you can stop with things called like security barriers. There's a variety of ways you can implement these, like sandboxing permissions. Like for instance, we could say, I do not wish to grant to applications the ability to turn on the microphone when the phone's in my pocket. But you know, if that's allowed by default, I consider that an OS weakness. And so, you know, I think that the point that you raised was more of a privacy violation. And those are harder for the operating system to have
Right,
visibility
that's where I was
into.
going, yep.
So, but for instance, something like accessing GPS data, it's pretty easy to grant only GPS access to selective applications, or take a different model where the whenever the application uses your GPS, the user is notified with a small little icon in the upper right of the screen. So if I'm playing Angry Birds and all of a sudden that little icon comes on, it's like, why does Angry Birds need to know where I am? And so this might alert the user to that, and then let them restrict permissions. But actually, I'm going to argue for Apple in this one.
Oh, here we
Users should
go.
not be allowed to set their permissions on their apps, because as we have found in many cases in security, often basically you give users too much, like the arbitrary ability to say, yes, I want to allow this app to spy on me, and they will say, oh, this app is spying on me, why did I complain about that? So I think that a sane set of restrictions that make running a mobile app that you download from the App Store as safe as going to a web page is where mobile security needs to go.
Gotcha. And looking at the Twitter fall here too, one Mentat
Hey, Tyler.
has a question. Hold on one second. One Mentat has a question. I think, and it's a good point to this, is what's the goal of the ownage? Is it just to steal the data, or is the goal of the ownage, something a little bit lower layer? And I think that might play into.
I think we need to hear from the people who invented GSM hacking, the Germans. So
All right.
I like to question the assumption that mass ownage is superior to targeted attacks. I mean, mass ownage has collateral damage, right? And I think that targeted attacks are the more dangerous thing here. And that's why I think that my layer should win as well, because this is sorry, but it's targeted and it's stealthy. So all of the other guys will have plenty of logs that people can analyze and do forensics on.
So that actually brings me to the next question. Which layer is going to be the best at a targeted attack, and how would that work? Great segue.
Okay. So on the baseband layer, I agree, you have to be not in the living room, but within the same city if you have enough power, right? In terms of output power for the radio that you operate. However, the thing is that basically nobody at the moment can do forensics on the firmware level. Nobody that admits to, right? So there might be people in this country's government who are able to do that, but thus far I haven't heard of any. If you do it correctly, all of what you're doing will stay in RAM, and you will not leave any. You will basically not leave any footprints thereafter. Whereas, if we're talking about the infrastructure attacks are very nice. I actually question that he can really push a firmware update, because I think most of the operators have problems with that as well for most of the phones.
The carriers can't do it. How come they can?
The other thing is that for the phones that support these features, the firmware updates are signed, So yes, there are some attacks in that space, but there's more involved than just hacking the infrastructure here and pushing something. You actually have to do you have to do some cryptanalysis or find bugs in those update things as well. So the messy thing about the infrastructure attacks is that you have to attack those networks from somewhere, and there's if you do that, there's going to be logs in those networks that are difficult to eradicate.
So he does make some good points, and I think a lot of what Ralph did say is true. But there are specific cases of mass ownage where that's not true. And one really good example is the car security module that I and Matt Solnick, sitting here in the front row, attacked successfully. So he did some exceptional work with me, and noticed there was a bug in some of the firmware update processes that were going on with this particular thing. And what ended up occurring is that we were able to force firmware updates and essentially force our own firmware to be loaded on the target device. And we could have done that for every single targeted device on the network, right? Very silently. Like nobody, there would have been no logs, there would have been no records of any sort, and it would have just been complete mass ownage. And I think that I proved that, and Matt proved that very successfully when we demoed the video yesterday of us actually stealing a car, right? So
that's pretty targeted.
Yeah, but it's also mass ownage, right? Because it didn't necessarily have to be targeted. We could have blasted this out to a bunch of different vehicles that we didn't even care about or weren't even in physical vicinity of, right? It would have been completely anonymous, somewhere random. It could have been anywhere in the United States. We just happened to be staying next to one of the vehicles that we targeted, right? But the other interesting thing here is that when you have certain bugs in FOTA, like you can just dominate the network very easily.
Is that no logs? Does that mean that all of the SMSs are not stored in some database in this country? I mean, I ran the statistics on my country, and I think actually the whole traffic for a year fits on a sweet little hard drive that I can store in my pocket.
So you're assuming that that technique actually used SMS, which it doesn't. So, but the other technique is this, right? Like, so a lot of what Matt and Nick and I have been working with are actually just doing targeted ownage with infrastructure devices, right? So, I mean, Ralph, you make some good point.
So,
I yield.
let me just speak.
No, we'll come back.
So you're not using SMSs for the car research that you presented yesterday? Or you can't talk about that?
Well, okay. So I can't talk about the specific technology in the case of us actually owning the vehicle, but I can say in this specific case that that one function, that piece of functionality, had nothing to do with SMS. Okay.
Okay, so it's going to be some other data thing then, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay, so I know for a fact that in my country there's quality assurance for all of the operators where all the traffic is stored for 24 hours, right? And this is just the operator doing that.
Sure.
So.
Okay. Now you've presented the question in a way I can answer. Okay.
One minute left on this topic at that end of the table, and we're going to be coming down here.
Yeah, no worries. So essentially, the way that you attack that and bypass the entire, there may or may not be logging stuff. It's like we don't really care if there's logging or not, right? Because I can sit outside somebody's house with an open BTS system that's professional for 10K, or I can use the THC femtocell, and I can perform the exact same attack with no logs. If there's a vulnerability in FOTA, and I can force the push to somebody's system by just using open BTS, then I win. Game over. And I could have done exactly that with Matt in this scenario. So.
But you're not attacking the infrastructure in that place. You're replacing the infrastructure with your own.
But hold
This
on.
marriage counseling sucks, and I hate being in the middle of it. It's my fault that you're getting divorced, and I feel really bad about it.
All right, I'm going to bring it down this end, guys. I'm going to bring it down this end of the table. Same question,
All right,
guys.
so-
I want to hear from the OS guys and the app guys now. Again, how would your layer be effective at a targeted attack, and why is it the best layer if you wanted to target a specific person in a specific company and own them?
So it's fun to talk about, oh, I could own the infrastructure or I could have this base station in the same city, but no one's really ever done that. So if you look at the OS level, like we've seen it, right? We see ways to attack anyone.
Mike.
Into my mic. Yeah. So we've seen actual attacks on the OS level, but we haven't seen any of these like fairy tale attacks that these guys are talking about. So, that's why I think, as a target attack,
we have a video.
Let me tell you a story. About 2 years ago, I think I was talking over Instant Messenger with this guy to my left here named Charlie, and he's like, "Hey, you want to see this bug that I'm working on?" I'm like, "Sure." And I'm like, "Let me get my development phone ready." He's like, "No, look at your real phone." And I'm like, "What?" And I look down at my real phone, and like the little 3G icon and AT&T icon was all cleared because my the comm center process, I think it was, had crashed because basically I apparently was the unwitting beta tester for his SMS exploit.
That's
because
pretty targeted.
He agreed to let me send it.
Yeah, I agreed, but he had my phone number and he launched an attack straight at my phone, and that hit something at the OS level, and that's pretty darn targeted if you ask me.
Well, at the app layer, I think we can all agree that if we look at Windows, it's incredibly successful attack is spear phishing, where you're sending people to click on links and you're sending them documents targeted to them. That happens every day. It's happening right now. The same type of attack could happen on a mobile device. Charlie found a vulnerability in Safari. There's been vulnerabilities in components of PDF rendering and things like that. So using the same technique of sending documents that trigger vulnerabilities in apps that are installed in everyone's phone seems like the most viable way of doing
It's
this.
OS level when it's installed on everyone's phone.
Oh, there's that gray area again.
Well, again, that's a gray area, but it doesn't necessarily need to be running.
It's not gray if I pull it out of the box and it's on my phone, right? That's part of the OS.
Okay, so maybe they installed Goodreader or something. I mean, there are other document readers you can install and attack it the same way.
But why would you do that if you were guaranteed he had Safari or the crappy Android browser?
Because maybe the number of vulnerabilities are easier to find in other apps that aren't picked over as well.
I'd just like to interject here real quick that one quick note that you have to have certain applications or certain things installed on phones, and there's multiple operating systems, of course, but everybody's got to use the same infrastructure. It's true.
Wrong.
There's far less number of infrastructures to choose from than there are variety of different applications.
I can choose between. I have choice. I can choose between Verizon and AT&T.
You may have seen a paper being leaked recently by the Miami PD that includes the revelation that there actually is passive interception with CDMA.
All right.
That is currently being used today
All right.
at this conference right now.
All right, we're going to move on to the next question. Now, you guys remember which layers you think are winning these, because maybe at the end here we'll have some Twitter comments and who people think won here. So keep that in mind. So the next question is...
Are there prizes?
No. You get a high five from me, and that's about it.
Worth it.
Glory. Oh, yeah, it's worth it. Trust me, I'll do it right here in public, recorded.
Dude, I've got passes for the Crystal Method party. It's totally tonight.
Go ahead, Ralph.
Let me just question another assumption. So I agree that we have seen attacks against applications in the wild, but I'm not aware of any widespread attacks or even targeted attacks that people admit to against the OS level at the moment.
That's
So
a good point.
Maybe
That's a good point.
people are not speaking about it, but it's like comparing that to targeted attacks against Windows is like that's two different worlds.
Charlie Miller is a targeted attack against the OS level.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to the next question. So realistically, and again, I'd like to start down at that end of the table. I'd like to start with Ralph on this one, however. What data can an attacker access if he were to successfully compromise via your layer? Can he access all data? Can he access a limited subset of data? What we're talking about here is loss potential.
Okay, that depends on what particular chipset we're talking about. So there are chipsets where you actually can jump from the baseband side to the application side. So this is due to the unfortunate design that, well, I think carriers pushed for more than a decade ago, where they wanted to have control over the CPU instead of the pesky user who was running application code. So they tried to get basically control from the baseband side to do things on the application side as well. So if you're talking about these if you're talking about devices that have these kind of CPUs, then the loss potential is basically everything that's on your phone. In other cases, where you have a separation between where the application processor is separate from the baseband processor, there still often are ways to jump between the two. So what I care about is from the baseband to the application, but also in the other direction, because the interfaces between the two are not meant were not meant to resist attacks, right? Because it's another chip that I trust. This is changing now, but that's the way it has been in the past, until last year, I think. And so, for instance, for Comm Center, if I own the baseband, I can still exploit vulnerabilities in Comm Center on iOS. But these days, Comm Center is a sandbox and process with low privileges, so I have to have another couple of exploits to really get everything off the phone.
So from what you're saying, then you need kind of a double layer attack. Then it's not just your layer, but it
Right,
takes a couple layers together in concert.
Yes, but actually, I mean, it's not just about the data that is stored on the phone. I mean, you're carrying around these devices all day, right? So, and they're basically in your environment, and maybe you care you care about your environment not to be listened to. Over the air. So these are valid attacks as well. So the loss potential is not just about the data that you store on your device, but it's also about the privacy that you have. And this may actually be more important for some people, because they know I'm not going to store anything important on that device, but they may forget to turn it off or put it somewhere else when they're in a situation where they're discussing things that should not be open to the public or to attackers.
OS guys, I think this may be a stupid question, but what can we get at through an OS layer attack?
Everything. So Ralph's trying his hardest to get to our level, and then he can get everything, because we're already there, we already have everything. So we have all the data, we can do, spy on you, exfiltrate data, we can turn it into a Bitcoin mining device, whatever we want. So we win this one for sure.
What he said.
Apps or infrastructure, you want to play at this level?
So, I mean, yeah, we're kind of at the other end of Ralph here, where we do still have to use the APIs to access all of that stuff. But at the same time, it's pretty easy to trick a user into permitting your application to do whatever you need to. I mean, my mom's not going to care what permissions an application's asking for. She's going to be like, yep, I'll do it. And then at that point, you have access to whatever APIs let you.
But if the user is able to give the application full privileges to read all their user's data, I think that's a weakness in the OS.
So you look for the loss potential?
But I mean, you can present your application as something that has legitimate uses for that. I mean, those APIs and that data are there for people to be able to create cool applications to do stuff with that data.
Like antivirus applications?
Yes.
So in other words, I think Dino's strategy for this fight is to usurp the app layer and take all of their pluses into his layer, while ignoring all the minuses.
So you're looking for the loss potential?
Loss potential down on the end.
So, I mean, obviously, with the infrastructure, if you can attack the infrastructure in a particular way, you can cause loss of business, downtime, loss of service, and on a mass scale. And the potential for loss is, all that money, all that billing, and then obviously, if you start to attack phones and go down the layer, it blows up from there.
I agree.
If you can't get my naked pics off my phone, then it doesn't work.
Say again?
You can make it to where I can't talk on my phone, but you can't steal my naked pictures.
Well, no, I'm
on
not
my
talking
phone.
about potential loss from you to the carriers, and that can be an issue.
Okay, so you're definitely...
No. So your layer is the worst,
hold on.
actually.
Hold on.
It only has loss
I totally
potential.
can leak stuff off of your phone because remember, the infrastructure includes functionality to update everything, right? And the functionality to update everything incorrectly. So I can still...
Aren't those updates signed?
You're assuming that they're signed correctly, dude.
We're ignoring the larger question here, which is why does Charlie Miller have naked pictures of himself on his phone?
That's worth
That's
a lot
the
of
best
points.
question.
That's a great point.
No, but really, I mean, if I can update your firmware, if I can leak your memory remotely, all that stuff can be done through the infrastructure. I own you as an individual, and I own the infrastructure. So either way, I think that's pretty much game over.
That's game over, so that's it for that question. Nobody has any more thoughts on that question?
I think Ralph has won everything so far. I'm just going to say that.
All right, we're going to start down at this layer here for the next question then. So if there were to be a group that were to use some of these types of attacks in a criminal capacity, what would be the most effective way to monetize it? Okay, so could they make a lot of money at the infrastructure layer? Could there be more money made at the app layer? This touches some on probability or loss potential, but loss potential in a negative sense to the target is different than profit potential to someone trying to monetize the attack. So which of these layers is going to be the first to be monetized?
Let me just be clear that I'm not going to answer this question because this business plan is confidential for this layer.
So I think the app layer is going to be the best to monetize because at the app layer I can do things like trigger events that charge purchases, like send premium SMS messages, dial the phone. I can at the app layer. Spicoli.
He was hungry, apparently.
Dino's mom
can
just dropped off a pizza. Very cute.
We've seen malware in the wild that is doing this type of activity. So it looks like an innocuous game, but it's directly monetizing by sending out requests that cost the phone owner money.
Anybody else monetize more than that? Oh, hold on, app's still going.
Also, we'd use the targeted attack to grab selected pictures from Katy Perry's phone and sell those to tabloids.
And
Speaking of
Tiger
that,
would pay a lot for those.
Good,
Well, I think this is easy. At the OS layer, you have access to any way you can monetize any data from any application you can do. And you can, exfiltrate the data in a way that none of the applications can see. So, win.
Hey, so Anthony, if you actually want Katy Perry's phone number, I've got it.
He's not kidding.
No, I'm not. Also, if you guys want to call Charlie Sheen, he's really fun to harass. We could do that right now. But really, when you're thinking about making money, the infrastructure is really sweet for that too, right? Because like I just said, I can find people. And I can not only find people, but I can monitor every single thing they do. Which means insider trading, tracking, getting all kinds of juicy information that's not only good for, whatever TZI or TDI or whatever that, gossip rag is that, buys info.
TMZ.
TMZ, thank you. But also actually just trying to make money off of stock, right? Or trying to manipulate stock. One really fun thing that you can do with infrastructure is a little thing called LOL phone, which a good guy named ASM came up with, which is a very simple attack, right? You just spoof 2 phone calls to 2 people. So I spoof Nick's phone number to Ralph, and I spoof Ralph's phone number to Nick, drop them in a conference call, and just listen to the call. They're both like, oh, dude, you pocket dialed me. No, you pocket dialed me. But they never hang up. So you just listen to what they say. And if you do this with executives, wow. Lots of cool info. So obviously there's a huge potential for monetizing there. And also with From Over the Air, I can force Bitcoin pushes to everybody's phone and then, oh wait, there you go, mining for millions of people.
It always comes back to Bitcoin, apparently.
Yeah.
Nick, got a comment, Nick?
No, I'm going to give this one to Ralph again. He just keeps winning.
I'm not going to answer for this layer. Sorry. So, well, okay.
You win anyway.
No. So, for this layer, I declare defeat because I agree that they can be monetized, right? So, I mean, yes, I can own people and give them little pieces of software that will cause billing problems for carriers, right? But for the other layers, this is vastly more easy. So. Monetization, I have thought about it, but it's difficult. And the other thoughts on this, yes, I like not to share at this moment.
Actually, so yeah, like Ralph said, the infrastructure, especially the application and OS level, it's all about information leakage if you want to monetize. It's not just about, getting malware onto phones or anything like that. Getting PDF documents out of emails that are on somebody's phone, and maybe you can use that to do insider trading, or you can get some blackmail material, who knows. There's many, many different ways you can monetize against a specific person. That's easy, but monetizing it against lots of people, mass ponage, I guess that's a little bit more difficult. But the layers where you've got access to a phone or the infrastructure, that's probably where you're going to be able to monetize things easily.
And I'd just like to point out that Ralph is actually so smart that he's probably afraid of tipping people off into good techniques to monetize things.
I'm throwing out my phone because it's within 2 feet of Ralph.
All data passes through the OS level. The end.
No. We have a no down at the end. Back it up, Nick. Let's hear it.
All information passes through the infrastructure that has to get to the OS to actually reside on the phone.
There's this thing I heard of. It's called, cryptography?
Yeah, and cryptography actually comes from the infrastructure and can be broken, right? So, hey, because where do the keys come from? The keys come from the infrastructure.
No, not always. Like OS and app level cryptography, where
Well, sure, app level. But if I can push new operating system code, then I can still win.
You can't push a new OS to my phone. It doesn't support that yet.
Well, yet. And actually, iOS does. So iOS
4 does not.
iOS 4 doesn't?
Over-the-air OS updates?
It's now enabled.
Oh.
I assume these are signed images that you're pushing.
Seriously?
It's going to get better in a couple of months.
All right.
No, you didn't. Did you not know that?
I didn't find anything where you could push a new OS firmware to iOS. I didn't look for that specific functionality, but
Nobody wants to drop the 0 day about this, apparently. Everybody's touching and dancing here.
I sold it to Grug.
He sold it, made a little money. All right. Well, on to the next question then. So we've talked a lot about offensive capacity. We've talked a lot about targeted attacks. We've talked a lot about opportunity attacks. What are the top things an enterprise-level company can do to secure your layer? And can it be secured at all? Anybody want to take a first crack? Wow.
I guess I will.
So these guys are all offensive. Security, they're like, wait, secure it? Why?
So I'm going to say that the app layer is probably one of the hardest parts to secure because everyone wants to let everyone download whatever they want onto their phone. And it's extremely rare that I find an organization that is willing to say, no, you can't do that if your phone has access to corporate data. So this is a big problem for the app layer.
that sounded like a concession of defeat from our friends to the right.
I guess
Can the infrastructure guys secure your layer at all?
I'll just throw out the same tips that Don and I talked about at our talk last year. Basically, you can use the type of infrastructure that's been attacked the least, and basically security through obscurity, or you can, force secure operation, like with GSM, for instance, try to use 3G only modes instead of letting it bump down to less secure modes, things like that. And of course, that's just from the RF side on your phone. Then you've got equipment that's out there, and you need to protect that. Unfortunately, that's just up to whoever manufactures them and how old they are, and what version of Sun OS they're running, depending on how old they are. HPUX, whatever. So then upgrade that stuff. But I mean, that's all I'd have to throw out there on this subject.
Just to go back to Dino's comment, that wasn't a concession of defeat. That means we win because we're the riskiest.
That's right. So in other words, the answer to this is no. The original, where you all guys looked blank and were like, no, you can't secure our layer, that's how you win this one. It was a trick question.
By not being able to secure your layer?
I'm just kidding. So seriously, though, what top things can be done at enterprise level to secure the operating system? Do we have to rely on Apple, or is there some other way that we can, as an enterprise, apply patches or create a kind of a system that makes it more secure?
Well, I think basically with the mobile landscape right now, you kind of have the choice depending on the platform you deploy, basically, because if you deploy, iOS-based systems, there is not anything that you can really do besides some configuration to kind of apply more security to the OS. And you're basically outsourcing the security of the platform to the platform provider. If you use other platforms, which shall remain nameless, you have to do it all yourself, or find other product companies to actually do that for you. And it's a philosophical difference, and you can choose whether you want to be responsible for it or not. And
At the end of the day, do you think it's going to be effective to use either of those models?
Personally, I think for most businesses, most enterprises, have the security baked into something like iOS is, best of breed on mobile platforms, and I don't think something like antivirus is necessary. And personally, I kind of like the new era where security services for the OS are kind of built into the OS and not a aftermarket add-on, because I think that can be more effective. But that's just my philosophical leanings.
Does anyone have a counterpoint to that at all?
I was going to say, along this line, I say that everybody should show what phone they actually use and on what carrier.
And
We've got a lot of mobile security experts up here. What are they all using? I'll start.
BlackBerry. We got one BlackBerry.
BlackBerry on Verizon.
An iPhone on AT&T.
Same.
Yep.
Charlie using an iPhone on AT&T?
Yeah.
Ralph's got a stack.
Roller with some Texas Instruments firmware. That's a Nokia. Well, I'm still working on that, and that's an iPhone.
And now you see why Nick is afraid to sit next to him.
So these are just some of the phones that I have. I'm trying to collect samples here. So I've actually heard that there have been some strange things going on. So if whoever did that could repeat that, I'm still collecting. Thank you.
Just iPhone on AT&T.
Apparently I'm the odd man out.
So why did you need this information, Nick? What was the point of digging out this information off our panel?
Isn't everyone curious what these mobile security experts were actually using and carrying around in their pocket? I think it's a valid question.
If someone couldn't guess what mobile device I used, please raise their hands.
Maybe for you.
So there's been a couple questions. A couple folks have asked here on the Twitter feed. Some interesting topics to throw out there. How does NFC, Bluetooth, 802.11, maybe at the firmware layer or maybe at the app layer, how does that play into the security of the devices? Can you guys talk around some of those topics? Obviously it's adding some additional threat landscape, but does this increase your risk at your layer, decrease the risk at your layer? How does that play into your layer? Again, the topics were NFC, Bluetooth, 802.11 firmware, et cetera.
Oh, I can answer for at least 802.11. Because again, that is extension of the infrastructure layer, I guess, to some degree.
In some respects, maybe, sure.
But it's really, we all know that that's probably the most insecure part of the infrastructure if it's being used. And so if the app developer hasn't written his transmission security correctly and is using SSL and checking certificates and looking for downgrade attacks and things like that, then his app is going to be transmitting data in the clear. So 802.11 definitely is, if you're using that with most apps, it's adding some risk.
Keep talking. I thought there was more. Sorry, I needed to find out what time we ended this thing. Anybody else? Is NFC playing to any of the other layers? Is there any risk with 802.11 for you guys?
So almost all those things actually get handled by the OS, right? So if there's a bug in the Bluetooth stack, that's going to end up that's part of the OS. So all those things are added risks at the OS level, I think.
I think those technologies are interesting in their own right, but from our point of view, we can own the heck out of you anyway, right? Those are just going to be new channels for us to traffic information if it's easier for us to get it. So it doesn't really change anything for us.
So it doesn't change anything at the infrastructure layer?
Not really. I mean, it's more opportunity, but it.
Do we ask each other
Well, actually,
Yeah.
those
I'll do that right
technologies are it's a type of infrastructure in themselves, depending on what you're connecting to and what you're using. But I haven't come prepared for 802.11, Bluetooth, and other technology security talks. So.
Little bit outside of your research corner at the moment. Okay, so at this point, we've got some good questions on Twitter. We've had no questions from the audience, so please feel free to throw your hands up if you want to just yell one out, and we'll get it repeated. There's one over there. Why don't we take that? Loud, stand up. Can't hear you. So the question was the nature of Android versus iOS, or open source versus proprietary operating systems, and which one might be more secure and which one is better. And I guess that across all layers, if you guys can play in that arena, but clearly that's a good question for operating systems.
Actually, if I can jump in here,
Yeah, go right
I
ahead.
actually think this is a really interesting question for the baseband, right? And I think I would actually like to get Ralph's opinion on this, but I think that open sourcing the baseband might be actually a really good thing. So there's opportunity for a lot of vulnerability research there, but you can minimize it the more eyes you have. And I don't know how well that's worked. The guys on the operating system side, maybe you can chime in on that a little bit. But I would actually like to see some of the baseband stuff open source. I don't know how much of an impact it would make for a positive side to security, to actually secure those operating systems or those flash operating systems. But it sure would make my life a lot easier as an attacker.
Are you sure we want to open source code written, 20 years ago or 15 years ago or whatever the baseband was written?
Well, that's the whole point, to get it. The whole point is in open sourcing is to get it actively developed now instead of using 20-year-old software. So
Gotcha.
I should have clarified that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So there is open source baseband firmware for GSM. It's a project called OsmoComBB that is led by Harald Welte. So this is a good approach to securing, but I don't think open sourcing the big stacks will easily work because there's a lot of IP involved in all of that. Sure. So and the companies who are involved in that market will not open their source code to outsiders. But also the question is whether there really are a lot of people that are capable of securing these things outside of these companies, because it's not just memory corruption vulnerabilities that are maybe harmful, but it could also be things in the state transition machine which could be harmful to the user privacy-wise. But those things will not be easily visible in source code, even they will not be easily visible to people who have worked in that field for a long time. So yeah, more eyes is good, but it doesn't always work.
Sure, but do you think it would help facilitate the process?
It would help facilitate the process, yeah.
Okay, let's move it up to this layer. Let's move it up to this end a little bit.
Stop fighting, guys.
Well, that was the point, Nick. This is a fight. Come on. So let's move it up to this layer a bit and talk about open source versus proprietary software and the security of each.
So I don't think it really matters if it's open source or proprietary, because there's plenty of really well-written proprietary programs out there and plenty of good open source ones, and there's some really shitty open source ones and some shitty proprietary ones. So I don't think that's really the issue. Like for us, if you look at Android versus iOS, that's a different story. So Android's worse, but it's not because it's open source. It's just it's not as good.
Actually, I want to use this opportunity to take a quick survey. So raise your hand if you use a open source based operating system or an operating system that has a large portion of open source code in it. All right, so let's keep your hands up. Okay. Now, keep your hand up if you have ever read at least one component, the source code for one component in that OS, like actually a sit-down reading, like an audit, or just trying to figure out how it works. All right, this is a bad audience for this.
Yeah, wrong target audience, Dino.
I know. That's refreshing, at least.
All right, so we're going to open up to the panelists. Do you guys have questions for each other? Do you have some things you'd like to ask?
I have a quick question for suitors number 1 and suitors number 2. If you were to take my phone on a date, where would you go?
First, I would take it down to the Brooklyn Bridge And we'd go to one of the restaurants down there, and then we'd have a threesome with Anthony.
Now, do you guys have any questions for each other? Are there any more questions?
I do have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Real quick. For the hardware, the open sourcing of the bootloaders that have been coming around with, I believe, HTC, do you see that as a good thing or a bad thing? Or what are the pros and cons for that? I've thought about it myself and come up with different pros and cons, but I wanted to hear from the guy that I consider to be winning the panel anyway.
I consider that as a very good thing to happen. Yes, let's start with the bad side first. Enabling people to have their own firmware running on devices, of course, makes a device more vulnerable to be rootkitted, right? But at the same time, giving people the freedom to run their own firmware also allows them to potentially fix bugs themselves. And this is an important feature for when you have to secure your devices beyond what the vendor does, right? So I think that's where we were before when Tyler asked what an enterprise can do to secure the infrastructure, the baseband, or the application side, or the operating system side. And we see this at the moment with iOS, right? So iOS is pretty locked down, and if you don't have a way to install your own software, and the next font bug comes around, well then you basically have to wait for the update from Apple.
Back here in the blue. Speak loud.
Apple fixed the last font bug, by the way. There's no more font bugs.
Go ahead.
If I had a limited supply of money, where would I throw my money at for things for the fund and risk the money?
Okay, so to repeat the question for the camera, if I had, and actually it's funny, I have that exact question written down. If I have X number of millions of dollars, what layer do I put it at? How do I put it there? And what's going to be the net effect of it?
You would go to China and pay off some dude in the semiconductor factory, and you would insert some hardware backdoor, and then you'd go to the OS layer and trigger it or something.
I have X number of millions of dollars to secure a layer.
Secure it?
Secure
I'm not
a
answering
layer.
this question. What the hell? Do you like how my brain worked there?
I think the best way to spend that
Screw
money
this.
is as hush money to Charlie Miller, and
Yeah.
he would give
Yes.
me 10% fee of that or something.
Come on, guys! You're a corporate enterprise CIO, CTO.
Okay,
and you've
if
got
you had
a
millions
$2 million.
of dollars,
You have a $2 million budget. Where do you put it, and what's it do
Replace
for you?
everyone's phones with 4G only in the world, and replace all the infrastructure. That's the only thing I can say for infrastructure.
Are you saying the infrastructure people concede here as far as enterprise being able
More
to
or
spend
less.
money? Okay, so they're out of the equation for this question.
Because it's unrealistic.
Let's move up the layer.
So if you're a CIO at a company wanting to secure your phones, throw a lot of money at it, you're probably not going to have much influence on the platform or the OS itself. So you're probably going to have to start looking towards third-party applications that try to tackle those problems.
I agree with that. I mean, that's the only place that an enterprise security executive is going to be able to control, really. So one way you could spend your money is basically whitelisting applications and reviewing applications and making sure that only good applications are getting put on your employees' devices.
Any other layers want to even play in this question? Can you throw $2 million at your layer and make it secure? Or are you pretty much screwed?
I think you can. So there actually are companies at the moment who are licensing baseband software and trying to make it, to strip it down to the bare functionality that you need for secure phones, and are producing these kind of phones. So I'm not sure what ballpark we're talking about here, but that's probably going to cost like in the tens of millions of dollars. But it's a one-time thing. So if you have this done, then other people can buy that.
Gotcha. Hopefully that answered your question. Let's go right here in the white.
So as a corporation that's looking to expand their mobile usage, their mobile infrastructure within their corporation, one of the things that we came across in looking at our requirements was, who cares about the mobile devices? What does it matter? Whether it's Android, whether it's iOS, whether it's BlackHat, who cares? The thing that we're interested in is the data. How does the data get on the device? device, whether it's owned or not, I don't care. If there's data on there, then I care. So is that an approach that's effective in terms of ignoring whether it's an Android, whether it's an iOS, whether it's a BlackBerry device or any other device, but instead worrying about how your data moves in and out of that infrastructure?
So just to repeat the question for the camera, the hell with anything except for how my data comes in and out. Does any of it really matter? Does the operating system choice matter? Does the carrier choice even matter? And all you really care about is the data inflows and outflows. Anyone want to care to comment on that?
Well, I just don't see how useful a device is that doesn't have, any data on it, right? So your email is there, that's data. Attachments is data. You're going to, internal websites in your company, that's data. I mean, for the device to be useful in the enterprise environment, it has to interact with enterprise data. So, I mean, then you're stuck with data on the device. Now you have to think about, does the OS choice matter? Do other security controls on the device matter?
Right, and in your opinion, Chris, does the OS choice even matter?
Yes, I agree with my esteemed OS colleagues. Here on
There
the
you go.
left.
He defers to the OS layer. Any other comments on this question?
But that's an interesting viewpoint because, like, first and foremost, these kind of devices used to be communication devices, cell phones, right? Mm-hmm. So it's kind of interesting that we're talking about them today as computers. So
because they really are. They've transcended completely. Yeah,
they always have been, but it's a shift in viewpoint.
Very much, and it's a good point to point out.
Like 10, 12 years ago, I couldn't have stored like 16 gigabytes of data on these kind of things, right?
Yep.
It was just like a couple of phone numbers, that's all.
Nobody over there. Go ahead, Green.
So most of these devices are all based off of ARM core processors. Among those processors are additional security features such as trust zone, MShield, security MSM. But for the most part, none of the operating systems are even using any aspect of this, with the exception of the encryption engines, the AES, the RSA, stuff like that. Do you think that that's a mistake by the OS writers, that they should be taking better advantage of these features, or do you think these features are redundant, don't really provide very much?
Too long to repeat. Go ahead.
That's an interesting question. You're correct. These kind of security features are not being used except for sometimes securing things such as the bootloader. But that's about it. But I think that's because the same things can be provided on a higher level usually. And I mean, so why would you want to use Trust Zone on such a device to prevent tampering with the firmware? Or what's the goal? I mean, what's the attack goal here?
Well, Trust Zone, just from what I read on it, granted it's kind of limited because ARM doesn't just throw out the information.
Yeah.
But it provides a segregation of memory and components on the chip.
I know, no, but like, what would be the motivation here to use Trust Zone that you can't do like on a higher layer? So to secure the firmware on the device that it cannot be like flash or something else, or segregating. Okay, that's what people are doing with virtualization these days. So. I'm not sure what actually the target for Trust Zone is. I haven't actually, so I think I'm aware of one research project that has demonstrated that it's useful for something, but I actually haven't, like, also on other ARM devices, I haven't actually seen this used in the wild. So.
Yeah, I'd say it's really not that big an issue because phones are more locked down than like PCs anyway, just by the way they're architected right now. And so, I don't think, since they're already designed more securely to begin with, I don't know if we really need to use all the features that are available.
Okay, I got time for one more question, and then I gotta have these guys close out. You gentlemen, you've been waiting.
In my opinion, the challenge, personally. That is my qualification for it. Just personal challenge.
Personal challenge, personal interest. Anybody else want to comment on your triggers for research? What triggers you to go, hey, this looks like it might be an interesting target of exploit?
Actually, just caring for other people, for one thing. I mean, at ISEC Partners, no, I'm being actually serious here, because really what it comes down to is like you see infrastructure problems and you see vulnerabilities in machines and systems, and you're like, wait a second, actually people are depending on those devices for their physical security.
Go ahead.
Don't laugh. Don is actually the most caring and genuine
our
person
OS
I know.
level cares more than your level, actually.
I think you were talking about what might trigger you within the code for as far as like where I might see an exploit, correct?
Not necessarily your motivation for exploiting, more like what things.
So
I completely misunderstood your question. I apologize, sir.
I think Charlie needs to answer this one, please. What do you see and go, oh my God, that's obvious?
So what I look for are things that are going to be like widespread problems that are really going to like freak people out, but are easy to find bugs in. So it's like a balance. And there's some things like finding the Apache 0-day is awesome, but that's too hard. So you want to find something that people are going to care about, but isn't so hard. And that's why I looked at Apple for a long time. But now they're actually getting hard, so I got to find something easier.
Now that I understand the question,
Android?
it's actually just emerging technology, right? You want to be at the forefront of whatever's new and interesting that people are building businesses on.
All right, so we only have about 3 minutes left, guys, so I'm going to give you guys each about 30, 45 seconds starting at the infrastructure layer and come up to close. Comments, why is your stuff the most risky? Why is it the easiest to secure? You got 30, 45 seconds to close.
When it comes to infrastructure can, a lot of things qualify as infrastructure. So, like I said before, it's actually the hardest to secure. That's the point I'll say is it's very hard to replace a lot of this equipment. And remember, this is all based on standards, and there's a lot of backwards compatibility. There's a lot of phones out there. You got to remain compatible with them all. And unfortunately, there may be some weaknesses in this infrastructure, and there's not much you can do about it without breaking a lot of the compatibility. So, I'm going to say, if Don wants to say otherwise, that we're probably shit out of luck when it comes to trying to secure stuff.
I just want to further qualify that by saying slow. It's extremely slow to update anything on our level. Right?
And to close out, like with all the 4G technologies coming out, that's vast improvements. So there's progress.
Similar thing on the baseband layer. So the problem is that once a phone is shipped, it's basically it's out there, and you have to assume that it's never going to be updated, and all of these devices are around. Also, the problem is that it's really hard to filter on the GSM level. Like you would have to sit between the device and the infrastructure to actually to filter messages that you deem malicious. People are trying to do that, but I still have to see how these solutions work in practice.
Come back to me.
So, I'll concede to the OS guys that, the apps have less permissions to do either bad things or, if a vulnerability is exploited, there's less you can do at the app layer. But the app layer is still the riskiest because there's the most potential vulnerabilities, because there's the most amount of code. The code is changing all the time, and the code can be installed by the user, any time. So there's more new code, both that is a potential malicious injection point, or where malicious behavior coming onto the device, or more vulnerabilities coming onto the device. So that's why it's the riskiest.
Actually, here's how I'll wrap up the OS thing. The single most important and powerful security decision you can make is which platform to use to hold your data. So, for instance, like what can I as an enterprise or I as a consumer do to affect the infrastructure? Or the baseband chips. There's not really much I can do, but I can choose the OS and like the platform that I'm gonna, deploy.
All right, and as the moderator, I get to declare the winner.
Ralph.
And I'm not going to declare a winner.
Ralph.
I'm going to declare the winner is you guys for having researchers like this
Worst
to do the work. So you guys can fight it out later. I guarantee you these guys would love to talk to all of you, one in turn. to discuss this in more depth. But really, I do want to thank the panel for their time, because they put a lot of time and effort into kind of understanding where we were going to take this panel. So hopefully you guys enjoyed it, and give them a round of applause, please.